The wind howled through the narrow alleyways of Lahore as Amer closed the rusty gate behind him, his fingers trembling not from the cold, but from a decision he knew would change everything. He had no ticket, no visa, no money, nothing but an old creased photo of the Kaaba tucked in the inside pocket of his shirt, and a heart that refused to give up. For 10 years, Amer had watched others leave for Hajj, their eyes brimming with joy, their souls floating as if touched by the divine. And every time, he had looked down at his blistered hands, calloused from stitching shoes for people who didn't even know his name, wondering if God had forgotten him. But this time, something inside him snapped, not with anger, but with faith, so ferocious it refused to be caged any longer. He whispered under his breath, "If you truly call who you will, then call me, even if I have to walk the whole way." That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he packed a small bundle, 3 shirts, a bottle of water, a torn diary from his late mother with du'as scribbled in Urdu, and 100 rupees. That was all. Before dawn broke, he boarded a dusty local bus to Karachi, pretending he had a plan. Every bump in the road whispered doubts, but Amer drowned them out with verses of the Quran he'd memorized as a child, letting them guide him like stars across a dark ocean. The journey had begun, and not a soul, not even Amer, could have predicted what awaited, because the road to Hajj for him wasn't paved in gold. It was paved in impossible coincidences, strangers' kindness, and something that felt a lot like miracles. At the Karachi port, Amer wandered aimlessly, looking for a ship he couldn't afford, among people who barely noticed him. He was about to give up when an old man in white approached him with a stare so sharp, Amer felt his breath catch. "You looking for the sea, or for something greater?" the man asked cryptically. Amer blinked. Before he could respond, the man pointed toward a cargo ship. "That one's leaving for Jeddah tonight. Don't ask how I know, just wait near the containers when the sun sets. You'll find your chance." Amer wanted to laugh. This wasn't a movie. But there was something in the man's eyes that made disbelief feel like betrayal. So Amer waited. Hours passed. The port quieted. And then, just like the old man had said, a container door creaked open, and a shadow waved him in. He didn't think, he just ran. Inside the dark metal box there were 3 other men. No one spoke, no one asked questions. It was as if all of them had heard the same whisper of fate. Days blurred into nights as the ship rocked across the Arabian Sea, with nothing but dates and shared bottles of water to survive. Amer prayed in silence, his knees sore from the metal floor, his lips cracked, but his eyes alive with something rare, hope. When they finally docked in Jeddah, guards patrolled the shipyard. The others fled into shadows, but Amer was slow, too slow. A flashlight caught his face. "Stop!" a voice barked. He froze, heart hammering. This was it, he thought. His dream ends in a foreign prison. But then, once again, fate interfered. The guard who grabbed him didn't call for backup. Instead, he stared at Amer's face for a long moment. "You from Pakistan?" he asked in Arabic-accented Urdu. Amer nodded. The guard's expression softened. "My mother was Pakistani. She died last year before she could go to Hajj. You remind me." "For brother, go." He pointed to the fence. Amer couldn't move. He wanted to cry, to laugh, to fall to the ground in sajda, but all he could do was run, the guard's voice echoing in his ears like a dua from another lifetime. But that was only the beginning. The desert night wrapped Amer in its suffocating heat as he trudged along the dimly lit edge of Jeddah's shipping district, the soles of his shoes half melted from the journey and his heart thundering like a drum, beaten by unseen hands. He didn't know where the road ahead led, but every breath he took seemed pulled not from his lungs, but from a deeper place. An ancient, aching desire buried inside his chest since the moment he first heard the call to prayer echo from the Kaaba through a television screen as a child. The city stretched like a maze of glittering towers and crumbling alleyways, unfamiliar and vast, yet Amer walked with a strange certainty, as if someone ahead were waiting for him. as if someone unseen had already cleared his path. He reached a small masjid near a dusty market, slipping inside just before Fajr, barely able to stand, his eyes fluttering with exhaustion. The moment his forehead touched the cool marble floor, he didn't rise for a long time, and when he did, an old man with trembling hands offered him water, dates, and something Amer hadn't expected, words that would haunt him for days. The road to Makkah takes more than legs, son. It takes surrender. Amer didn't know what. He had surrendered yet, not entirely, but over the next days he would learn that surrender meant letting go of the illusion of control, that in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a man with no papers was a ghost, and ghosts weren't supposed to be seen, let alone make it to the holiest place on earth. Yet still, Amer pressed on, guided by the kindness of strangers who appeared when hope thinned to a thread. A Bangladeshi laborer named Farouk spotted Amer sitting in the heat near a petrol station and handed him a mango wrapped in newspaper. No words. Just a mango. And later, when Amer offered the same mango to a young boy crying outside a broken-down van, the boy's father stepped out and said, "You are the man my wife dreamt about." Amer blinked. "What?" The man nodded solemnly. "She dreamt. A tired man would give our son fruit before our car would start again." And before Amer could respond, the van sputtered back to life as if responding to prophecy. With each passing hour, reality bent further around Amer. He never begged, never asked for help, yet help found him. A truck driver gave him a lift toward Taif after overhearing Amer recite surahs under his breath. The driver's daughter had died 2 years ago, and hearing the Quran made him weep. "I've been numb since she left," he told Amer, "but you reminded me why we endure. Go." To Makkah, go for her. He dropped Amer off miles outside the city, near a checkpoint manned by guards who didn't blink as he passed. It was as if he had turned invisible, shielded not by cunning, but by divine design. Amer began to wonder, was this faith? Or had he crossed into something more? A destiny not entirely his own? In the mountain pass near Hajj, Amer encountered his greatest challenge yet. His body began to fail him. His knees buckled. His lips bled from dehydration. For the first time, the thought crept in, what if I die before I get there? But just as darkness began to overtake his sight, he saw a small light flickering in the distance. A cave? A campfire? He crawled toward it and collapsed at its edge. When he awoke, he was inside, wrapped in a wool blanket, and a group of Sudanese shepherds were gathered around, reciting Quran in low, melodic tones. They didn't speak his language, but their eyes spoke volumes. One of them handed Amer a clay cup of goat's milk and nodded as if to say, "You're not finished yet." He stayed with them for 2 days, recovering. On the third night, the eldest among them took his hand, placed something inside, and closed his fingers. When Amer opened his palm, he saw a tiny gold pin shaped like the Kaaba. No explanation, no exchange. Just a symbol, one that filled him with renewed strength. Amer's arrival in the outskirts of Makkah didn't feel real. The skyline loomed like a mirage made of marble and faith. His legs trembled not with exhaustion, but anticipation. Every step forward, every heartbeat seemed to echo with the millions who had walked before him. Centuries of souls pulled toward the same sacred point. But as he neared the city limits, he was stopped by 2 officers. For the first time, Amer panicked. No magic, no mysterious stranger this time, just cold protocol. They demanded identification. He had none. They spoke in clipped tones, one of them reaching for a radio. But then something happened Amer would never forget. A third man stepped out from a nearby shop, dressed in simple clothes, barefoot, with a prayer bead wrapped around his wrist, and spoke to the officers in a voice that made them freeze. They turned to Amer and nodded. "Go," they said. "You have clearance." Amer didn't even look back. He ran. That night he entered the haram for the first time. When Amer's bare feet touched the cool, sacred marble of the haram's courtyard for the first time, time itself seemed to shatter into silence. The noise of the world, the shouting of vendors, the humming of vehicles, the clatter of life, evaporated in an instant, leaving only the sound of his breath and the deafening thump of his own heartbeat. There, in the distance, framed by a sea of white-clad pilgrims moving in rhythm, as if led by the pull of the divine, stood the Kaaba. He had seen it in photographs, in videos, in dreams, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of its presence. It wasn't just a structure. It was like standing before a mountain made of mercy, a black stone that held the grief, hope, and prayers of a billion souls. Amer staggered forward, weeping openly, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sensation that he had been called here, personally summoned, despite every obstacle, despite logic, despite the 1,000 reasons he should never have made it. And yet, here he was, alive, awake, and home in a way he had never understood until this moment. But Hajj was not a reward. It was a crucible, and Amer quickly learned that reaching the Kaaba was only the beginning of a deeper, more grueling journey. The rituals that followed, the nights in Mina, the standing at Arafat, the stoning of the pillars, were not just symbolic motions. For Amer, they became trials that clawed into his soul. On the first night in Mina, his tent was lost in the crush of a crowd 10 times larger than anything he had ever imagined. He wandered alone, exhausted, trying to find his place among thousands of tents that all looked the same. Hunger gnawed at him again. A man beside him collapsed from heat stroke. No one seemed to notice. But Amer knelt down, cupped water into the man's mouth, and stayed with him until an ambulance arrived, never knowing the cameras nearby had captured it. The next day, people began recognizing Amer as the man who helped the pilgrim, and volunteers insisted he eat with them. One woman even offered him her son's extra ID wristband, whispering that she had no idea why she brought 2, only that she felt she should. Then came Arafat, the mountain of mercy, the place where pilgrims stand, not to plead, but to bear themselves, before God completely. Amer stood there under the scorching sun, drenched in sweat, arms raised high as if holding up the sky itself. Around him the air shimmered with the prayers of nations, every language rising into the same heaven. But Amer said nothing at first. His lips wouldn't move. His chest was tight. For all his passion, for all his desperation to be here, now that he stood before God, he didn't know what to ask. Finally, through trembling lips, he whispered, not for money, not for ease, but simply, "Let this not be in vain." And the wind shifted, literally. A sudden gust swept across the field, like an unseen hand brushing his cheek. Others noticed it too, glancing around. But Amer dropped to his knees, struck by the feeling that someone had heard him, not just in a poetic sense, but literally, deeply, intimately. The next day, during the stoning of the Jamarat, Amer nearly died. The crowd was wild, compressed, boiling with heat and haste. Pilgrims surged forward to cast their pebbles at the symbolic devil, a ritual meant to remind each soul that evil must be confronted, not avoided. But a sudden shift in the mass of bodies caused Amer to trip. He fell hard, and within seconds, he was underfoot. He gasped, struggling to breathe, screams muffled by sandals and shouting. His vision dimmed. This was how it would end, crushed under a ritual meant to honor his faith. But just as he gave in to unconsciousness, a pair of hands, strong, sure, grabbed him and pulled him upright with impossible force. A face loomed before him. Familiar. Too familiar. It was the same barefoot man who had appeared outside Makkah's gates. He nodded once, then vanished into the crowd. Amer blinked wildly, stumbling away, lungs burning. He asked nearby pilgrims if they'd seen the man. No one had. No one even believed him. "You're hallucinating," someone said. But Amer wasn't so sure. From that point on, things became stranger. Each location, each step of the Hajj, seemed to unfold with a kind of invisible choreography around him. When he arrived at Muzdalifah, he found a perfect spot beneath a lone tree, shade in a place where shade was nearly impossible to find. When he ran low on water, Someone accidentally dropped a bottle right at his feet, then hurried on without even noticing. And one night, when he sat alone on the ground near the Masjid al-Haram, too tired to move, a young boy sat beside him and began reciting Quran in the exact same voice as Amer's late father. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. Amer turned to look, tears running down his cheeks, but the boy was gone, vanished like smoke. He began to wonder if he was losing his mind, or if perhaps he was seeing what others couldn't. On the final night of his Hajj, as the crowds thinned and the stars took their place in the black velvet sky above Makkah, Amer sat alone in the courtyard, gazing up at the Kaaba. He no longer needed answers. He no longer craved miracles. What he had received was something else entirely: acceptance. Every pain, every doubt, every closed door had led here. And the beauty of the journey wasn't that it had been miraculous, but that he had endured it when nothing suggested he could. He rose quietly, placed his hand on the Kaaba's wall, and whispered only one final thing. Thank you. For everything. Even the silence. But just before dawn, as he prepared to leave the haram, a man approached him, tall, elderly, wearing a shawl with a pattern Amer recognized instantly. It matched the one in the photo of his mother standing beside the Kaaba, decades ago. The same pattern. The man spoke in perfect Urdu and handed Amer a small envelope, then turned and walked away without another word. Amer opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a note that read, "You were never alone. You were always seen. Turn home, and you will understand." And beneath that was a plane ticket to Lahore dated for the next day. When Amer stepped off the plane in Lahore, he wasn't the same man who had departed. There was no fanfare, no relatives waiting with garlands, no cameras to capture the exhausted pilgrim's return. Just the dull hum of the arrivals hall and the thick, damp air pressing against his skin like a memory. The envelope with the ticket still trembled in his pocket. He didn't know who the man was, didn't know why the note had spoken as if someone had been watching all along, but deep inside him, he didn't need evidence. Something ancient in his soul had already accepted the truth. He had been guided. Whether by angels, fate, or the long reach of prayer, someone had walked with him unseen. But now, back in his homeland, everything felt off. Familiar streets looked different, as if the light had changed. Even his neighborhood, once noisy and teeming with life, felt suspended in a dream. When he arrived at his old family home, a wave of emotion hit him harder than any prayer at Arafat. The front door was not broken, just gently swinging in the breeze like it had been waiting. Inside, the house was dim and dust-coated, but not abandoned. A single light glowed from the far end of the hallway. His heart pounded. He walked slowly, his sandals brushing against the floor like whispers. And then, from the doorway to the sitting room, a voice called out softly, one he hadn't heard in 20 years. "Took you long enough, Amer." He froze, his throat clenched shut. His knees buckled. There she was, his mother, alive, older, frailer, eyes deep with time, but unmistakably her. The same shawl with the same pattern from the old photo draped around her shoulders. Amer fell to the ground, sobbing, unable to speak, unable to even ask how or why. She knelt beside him, lifted his head into her lap, and simply said, "I knew you'd come back when your soul was ready to hear the truth." And what followed was a story more unbelievable than anything he had seen on his journey. 20 years ago, after his father's sudden death, Amer had been too young to understand the quiet choices his mother made to protect him. The debts, the threats, the people who came at night demanding things Amer never knew about. One day she had taken a deal, a desperate one. A rich man who claimed to be a guardian of pilgrims had promised her protection in exchange for something she couldn't refuse, her life's savings, and a promise that when her son was old enough, he would walk the path meant for him. She had agreed. That man had vanished, but years later the letters began arriving. Unmarked, always just before some major hardship in Amer's life, always with strange advice. urged him to take paths that seemed foolish, like the trip to the bookstore where he met the imam, or the job he lost that forced him into charity work where he learned humility. Every step, every fall, had been shaped by messages he never connected. Until now, she handed him a box. Inside were dozens of letters, all signed with the same symbol. A crescent inside a circle, something Amer remembered faintly from one of the stalls near the haram. But more haunting was the last envelope, dated only days before his Hajj. It had been sent to her by someone who called himself the guide, and in it a message. He is ready. He has suffered enough to understand mercy. Soon he will meet the man in white. When he does, tell him the boy he saved in Makkah was your son. Amer's mind spiraled. The man he'd helped on the street near Makkah's gate, the one who collapsed, had vanished afterward. He thought it was coincidence. He never even asked the man's name. But now his mother told him the truth. Years ago, she had adopted a child, left at the door of a local masjid, whom she had raised in secret. That boy had always dreamed of going to Hajj, but fell gravely ill. Through some impossible thread of destiny, Amer had saved that same boy's life during his own pilgrimage, without ever knowing who he was. The revelations didn't stop. The barefoot man who kept appearing? A real person, once a scholar known for helping pilgrims long ago, who had died in Makkah years before. But many claimed he still appeared in times of need, always barefoot, always silent. When Amer described him, his mother showed him an old photograph tucked into one of the letters. It was him, the same man, the barefoot helper, dead for over a decade. The room began to spin. Amer couldn't breathe. Everything, every twist, every impossibility had not been random. It had been a web woven so delicately, so deliberately, that he had walked its lines without seeing them. He had cursed the hardship, the hunger, the silence of God, never knowing that silence had been filled with motion. Every closed door had been a redirection. Every loss, a disguise for mercy. And then came the final truth, one that shattered him, his. Mother handed him a faded document, a will, dated years ago from his father. In it, a simple line. If Amer ever finds his way to Hajj, tell him he was never meant to come back the same. He carries something that others will need, a voice, a light. Amer stared at the words, feeling something ignite in him. Not fire, but something older, like destiny. From that day on, Amer never spoke of the exact details again, not to the press, not to friends. But stories began to spread of a man who returned from Hajj and began walking across the country, not to lecture, not to preach, but to sit with strangers, feed the hungry, build homes, heal wounds. He never took money. He never stayed in one place for long. But everywhere he went, people said the same thing. There's something about him, like he's carrying a secret the world forgot. And if you asked him, if you were lucky enough to sit with him under the stars and ask what changed him, he'd only smile and say, I went on a journey expecting answers, but all I found was love disguised as difficulty. And then he'd walk away, barefoot,